Kia ora. Welcome to the Refugees and Survivors Symposium titled Refugee Resettlement in a Time of International Change. Our webinar today is on rainbow community resettlement issues. Ko Sarah toko ingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Our guest presenters today are Eliana Rubashkyn and Jack Byrne. We will begin with a conversation of about 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A. And please add your questions in the Q&A box during the discussion rather than the chat box. So back onto my introductions. Eliana. Eliana is a former refugee who arrived in 2014 to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Born in Bogotá, Eliana was forcibly assigned at birth as a male, but grew up aware of her intersex condition. Due to the violence that she experienced there, she was forced to leave Colombia to protect her life. Eliana suffered severe mistreatment in Hong Kong due to her ambiguous gender and appearance and applied for refugee status. New Zealand accepted her, and Eliana was the first case of gender recognition in the world under the International Refugee Statute of 1951. She was stateless for 6 years, but during that time, Eliana validated her studies in public health, pharmacy, and chemistry, and today works as a chief scientist in a pharmaceutical company here in Tamaki Makaurau. At the beginning of 2019, Eliana co-founded Rainbowpath with other former refugees and LGBTQI+ activists. Jack. Jack is a Pākehā trans man and human rights researcher born in Mawhera, Greymouth, who now lives in Tamaki Makaurau with his partner Rebecca Swan. From 2005 to 2014, he worked at the New Zealand Human Rights Commission, where he project managed its transgender inquiry. Jack has worked on national, regional, and international research projects and advocacy campaigns. These have included co-authoring Counting Ourselves, the Aotearoa New Zealand Trans and Non-Binary Health Survey, the Asia Pacific Trans Health Blueprint, and a manual for national human rights institutions in this region on how they can advocate for rights of the rainbow communities. Jack is an ally who has supported Rainbowpath's work since it was founded and is keen to build a greater awareness with rainbow communities about rights of spontaneous and convention refugees. So Jack and Eliana, wonderful to have you here. And to start today's conversation, Eliana, would you like to just tell us a little bit more about Rainbowpath?
Kia ora, everyone. So Rainbowpath is a group that I define it as a peer support group, starting in January 2019, and it was made mostly of people who came here as asylum seekers. And now most of them are convention refugees, and they don't have, or most of them, they don't have permanent residency. We have some quota refugees as well. But because the struggles are different, we are actually noticing that the help that Rainbowpath is tailoring is for these convention refugees. And then we also have few allies that are part of our organization and other migrants as well.
Great, great. Yeah. How many people have you got involved with Rainbowpath at the moment?
So we're about 14 if we count the members that are regular members, but the group can grow wider, like the people that are like allies, and it can be up to 30 if we count also other members that are not in Auckland, which is where most of our members are located.
Right, right. And the sort of supports that you are offering, does that include social supports, legal supports? What?
So because as an organization, we run without funding, our support obviously cannot be as extensive as the support that other organizations can do, but it's more about like as refugees, former refugees, or like people who have a refugee background, what we aim to do is to help them to understand the complexities of this New Zealand, the complexities of the system. Also, we recommend them which lawyers could help them in their case. And also we are a family, because many of us, when we come to Aotearoa, New Zealand, we are very alone and we don't have anyone to call family. So for us, Rainbowpath is actually our only and one family that we can call family.
Right. That's great. So, Jack, could you give us some historical context in terms of how the rainbow community issues have been framed in Aotearoa thus far?
Okay, and I was going to start, kia ora koutou. I was going to start with a little bit of the terms, just because not everyone listening may necessarily know them. So apologies to those from our community who are here. But so when we say rainbow, it's the term nowadays, rainbow and takatapui together, sometimes is the word to describe all LGBTQIA plus and other identities. And there's, three specific parts. One is about diverse sexual orientations. And that's probably, if people think back to terms around gay pride and lesbian pride, that was probably what people heard about the most in Aotearoa from about the 70s onwards. So all of the stuff about diverse sexual orientations, that's the LGBTQ part. Trans is the T part, and that's anyone it's about gender diversity. So anyone who the gender that they identify as doesn't match what people assumed they were at birth. So people often know someone like Georgina Bayer, who's a trans woman, and I'm a trans man. I have an identical twin sister. People assumed I was a girl when I was born, but I'm not. And I've lived as a man for about, 17 years. And then I intersex, it was part of Eliana's introduction. So that's when there was a diversity in physical sex characteristics. So that's parts of the body, some of it might be external that you notice on a baby at birth, or might be some that develop with hormones at puberty, or maybe you never know because it's part of someone's chromosomes. But it's a physical sex characteristics diversity. And so that all of those three different components are our rainbow. And rainbow people, you said in Aotearoa, well, actually, here, there are, really strong, positive stories and poems, traditional poems about gender diversity in traditional Māori society. It's clear, I've done training all across Asia and the Pacific, and just about all those countries that I've been to, there are traditional terms for trans women and often for intersex people within communities where there's Islamic faith. Muslim communities often had another word and a particular role for intersex people. And so there's a long positive histories, but the history of human rights and the movement away from human rights is where diversity is stomped on and people are judged and discriminated against. So even though rainbow people, we all have the same human rights as every other human being, and the right to self-determination, to freely express who we are, to make decisions about our own bodies. But our communities all over the world face discrimination and hatred and violence. And sometimes that's done in the name of laws, saying that we're criminals. And often those have been colonial laws imposed in many other parts. In this region, often British colonial laws that said who we were, particularly that homosexuality was a crime, or to cross-dress, to dress in clothes different from the sex people thought you were, was a crime. So we were criminals. We were perceived to be ill. So mental health diagnoses were placed on us. Many of those, have now been removed. But for a long time, people said we were ill, and that it was ethical to try and change who we were through conversion therapy. And of course now, yeah.
So Jack, do you think that though that narrative plays into the unconscious bias of how within service providers and how the rainbow community may be perceived and how they're therefore affecting their care?
Totally, because you know, it affects trans, intersex, queer people themselves when you have all of that negative stuff. And the one I didn't mention was you know, narrow interpretations of religious texts as well. So it impacts on how we see ourselves, but it does impact on other people's attitudes. And it, like you said, unconscious bias, or sometimes just a fear of maybe doing the wrong thing, or feeling, you know, just taking no action because it's too hard. And other times it's explicit overt discrimination.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that context, because sometimes we're really unaware of where our unconscious biases may come from. And so therefore understanding some of that historical context is really useful for anybody watching. Eliana, do you, with that, and obviously Jack has kind of given us an overview of what people are facing from your community overseas as well as here in New Zealand in another level. So could you kind of just maybe expand on who does seek safety in Aotearoa? Who are the people that you meet here who have sought safety here?
So it obviously depends, because before you seek safety in this country, you need to arrive to this country, and it's not easy to arrive to New Zealand. So if it's already challenging for someone just coming here to New Zealand to, I don't know, for traveling or for living for some time, it's even more challenging for rainbow communities. So, I mean, every person that is living in a country in which they are facing persecution, which is approximately 70 countries that we can claim that have stated that consensual sex is a criminal act. And then a number of other countries that they don't have criminalized, for instance, same-sex acts or the LGBTI community as a whole, but that there are extremely violent countries that in which those communities are subjected to extreme violence. Okay, and this is the case for instance of Latin America. And most of the Latin American countries are, at the eyes of the law, are safe countries for LGBTIQ communities, but are countries with approximately 70% of the murders of this community are happening. So this is just a way for people to understand that it's really hard to assume someone is in a safe environment just by the law, because law always doesn't even reflect many aspects of like perceptions and how our communities are being treated in those countries. So once they find a way out of that environment, so they follow the process that many people in the refugee world understand, which is to go to a second country or trying to seek, come to New Zealand and to seek asylum here in New Zealand. So there are these two pathways, one which leads to the quota refugees and the one that comes in conventional refugees. So why New Zealand is seen as a country that the rainbow people see as a country to come for, because it's a country that it protects us in the best way. You know, there's still lots of things that can be improved, but it's a country that protects our existence and enable us to exist. And it's a country that enable us our existence without the fear of being murdered suddenly in the street or being discriminated in horrendous ways, because discrimination still happens in New Zealand, but not at the levels that we experience in other countries of the world.
Yeah. So even though here in New Zealand, obviously the discrimination is nowhere near as overt as other places in the world, what are some of the issues faced though when you do arrive either as a quota refugee or as a asylum seeker?
Yeah, so I wanted to mention something in this, just to navigate to this, to answering this question. So one of the things that you will find out is that New Zealand doesn't have enough LGBTI refugees, or at least the amount of LGBTI refugees or in both categories, quota refugees or convention refugees, is not a number that we believe reflects the truth of our community. So we are present in every culture of the world, and we could be 10 or 15% of the total global population. Still in New Zealand, you don't see those numbers being reflected on the people that is coming in here, okay? And especially I find this problematic because we are we are subjected to situations that are more challenging than a normal or a conventional refugee. So this is something that I wanted to highlight. Before, and because of that, so we might be perceived as invisible, or we might be seen as that we don't exist, or we are not very common in New Zealand. One of the problems is because the quota systems which bring refugees here, they don't specifically mention that, for instance, we are a particular group of risk, or a particular group that requires a special consideration. So there are other groups like women at risk, and then we have people with disabilities, but there are not particular quotas for people with LGBTIQ background, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so,
is there anywhere else in the world that has that specific category under their quota system?
Canada.
Right.
Yeah, so Canada is one of those countries, and there are other countries. For instance, Sweden is another country. Okay,
Right.
Sweden has stated that specific approach to LGBTI refugees. But
Right.
yeah, we would like New Zealand to take that step also.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we often say that we are refugees among refugees, and this is something that not many people understand why. But for us, this is how we feel. We feel unsafe even when we are in refugee settings. We feel very, very unsafe. Yeah.
Do you want to expand a little bit about, we had some conversations earlier around some of the issues that may have popped up, for example, at the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre. I think it's worth just kind of clearing that a little bit so that people can understand also.
Yeah, so I mean, the people that is coming here to New Zealand, that is coming through the quota refugee system, they might experience a lot of challenges in Mangere. And I will let you know later on what happened when before you come into New Zealand. But when somebody is coming here to New Zealand, the challenges that you will experience are very different. And for instance, if you are placed with people from your own nationality, you can like reenact all these acts of discrimination that you were subjected in your country. It's just
right.
Because you are being placed with people that have similar views with the country you're coming from. So you are exposed to these situations that you're running away. And this is one thing, and things can escalate really badly. And we, for instance, can fear that violence can be extended to Mangere. And some members of our community have experienced this level of violence. And we fear that level of violence to be like even sexual violence and other things that we know have happened here.
Yeah.
And just imagine if that's happening in Mangere. Not just imagine what happens when you are coming to New Zealand through the quota system and you are in a refugee camp in another country, and that other country is particularly not welcoming with LGBTI issues. Let's say Indonesia, for instance, or let's say Malaysia, or those countries that are used as countries from which they take these quotas of refugees. And you are spending like your life 5 years over there, either in the community or in a refugee camp. And you have to be constantly subjected to mistreatments by either refugees or the community or the police.
Right.
And then it's just a very horrendous situation. You are not safe from anyone. You are not safe even from your, like a refugee people around. You are completely alone, isolated, and you are constantly subjected to these incredible levels of violence and sexual abuse.
So you've outlined for us the journey to New Zealand and some of the hurdles. And Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre is a wonderfully safe place, generally, absolutely. But I think it's very interesting for someone like me who works out there, and some of those issues I had not necessarily crossed my mind. When people have arrived and then we're going through the process of finding their feet in New Zealand, and we've talked about the idea of resettlement actually not being particularly doesn't really fit the narrative of most people who are here at the moment, for example, who are convention refugees, because that resettlement process hasn't even started to begin. So with that in mind, Jack, would you like to kind of come in here, and Eliana, and both of you sort of let us sort of build a picture for us about what happens for Rainbow community asylum seekers and convention refugees?
Oh.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Eliana, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the ID documents, and that's a particular one that people mightn't have thought about. Clearly, everyone thinks about every asylum seeker or refugee who's here, you know, always having to have a visa, always having to have that document with legal status. But there's an additional element for trans people who come here, because just very, very few of them, anyone from this region, will be able to change their name, the gender marker, whether it says female or male, or their photo on something like a passport that they bring from their country. So then, for example, if you have, I'll make up someone, a Muslim trans woman who turns up here and her passport from her country says that she's a man, has a picture of a man with a beard on it, has male written on it and a male name. That document is useless to her, but she cannot change her name in New Zealand. You cannot change your name in New Zealand till you're a permanent resident. And it is really, really, really difficult to do any step of a process of settlement in New Zealand till you have some document you can use to prove who you are. You know, like we know, to get the emergency benefit, you have to be able to open a bank account and get an IRD number. You know, I've been with people who don't have any document they can show to prove who they are and the right name, and gone to 10 banks before finally someone takes pity, because there is no law that says that they have to do it, and allows you to open a bank account in the right name. And then so that inability to have documents, and that's one of the things we've been lobbying about. And we've talked to ministers, we've written letters, and everyone throws it back and forward between Immigration New Zealand and Department of Internal Affairs. But for someone working in a refugee support service, you know, anything that you can do to affirm the name, the gender, and, you know, provide some sort of piece of paper with your letterhead that they might be able to take to that person at the bank. You know, currently they might take a letter from a lawyer. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But the more documents you have got, and the more times in your life that someone is affirming who you are, does huge positive stuff in affirming your identity, when everything else is making you, like, it's another way of being stateless in a way. It's another way of having no identity, nothing that anchors that you as who you are. And many people have come here with no support back home, back in their country of origin, have got here, and for some are starting a process of coming out about their sexual orientation or their gender identity, because this is the first place they could ever have done that. And anyone here who knows friends who are going through, you know, people born in Aotearoa thinking about their gender identity or their sexual orientation and wondering, will their family still love them? Well, if you already knew you didn't have family support, you've gone all the way across the world, you've got no support here, and you're doing that, and you can't get the emergency benefit because no one will open you a bank account, and then you're trying to find out about accessing health services, all the free health services for refugees at PHOs in Auckland. You then have to try and find if one of them knows anything about gender affirming care or not, if you've got the right language to ask for that. And then with very little money, you have to get yourself across to Auckland Sexual Health and ask about starting gender affirming care. And we've got huge waiting lists there. And until very recently, quite often people would have said to you, if you weren't a permanent resident, you have to be a permanent resident to get those services. Now people are finally realising that this is just another health need that people have, that they should be able to access as soon as they arrive here. But all those layers. And then, you know, everyone wanting to try and find a way that eventually you could bring your partner here. But you can't prove that that person has been your partner because you weren't allowed to live together in your previous country.
Mm.
So you can't prove that. There's no one who will say that you were, because you couldn't tell anyone. It wasn't safe to tell anyone. And Immigration New Zealand officer, your third caseworker maybe, because they keep, maybe they lost your file, or maybe someone left, or ask you again ridiculous questions about, I'll show you, the place you rented and lived together. Don't you have that? Or don't you have this?
Yeah.
And so it's all those layers. And I guess we wanted to convey to people, it's all of those adding on top of each other. And yet at the other end, when you see what support services are available, people look at our community members and see a single person. So a single person is seen as needing less because they haven't come here with children. They assume that this person is able to work. Okay, if they're asylum seeker or convention refugee, they may be on really short visas. No one's going to give them a job.
Yeah.
And even if they do, the extra thing of having that ID document, people aren't able to show their work history. They have no work history under the name that they're using now. I can think of, Muslim people I know trying to get security jobs. And, just getting that first job when you have to find someone who believe who you are, believe you can do this job, but you can't show any history because the history will tell them you are trans.
Yeah.
Right. Eliana, do you want to expand on that? And I guess one of the things, after hearing all of that, obviously the cumulative impacts on mental health is immense.
So, for instance, isolation goes beyond imagination because, refugees experience that. So that's something that a lot of refugees experience that. But for us, it's particularly unique because we often are alone. And we are alone because, and we cannot engage with our community. We can't engage with our culture, and we cannot engage with our religion or people that remind us home just because of that how unsafe it is for us. So we spiral in that sense of total isolation. And then New Zealand is a country in which you can be isolated really easily. Okay. And then all those elements of isolation are incredibly strong, and a lot of us struggle with mental health issues because of that. And mental health issues is one of the biggest issues that we deal with. And I'm not saying because what Jack said, because we are LGBTIQ, we have mental issues. I'm saying no, mental issues because of the isolation and all the feeling of rejection. A lot of us, we don't even speak anymore to our families. So we don't have families, we don't have social networks. A lot of us struggle to make meaningful friendships. And so we are completely on our own in a country, in a language we don't speak. And even in those places in which refugees are welcome, we feel like, I'm not welcome here. This place is not a safe space. I don't feel this place is a place in which I can be supported because it's not explicitly showing that. And if I go to that place, I will see people that I feel that they are negative against LGBTI issues. Therefore, that place is incredibly a not safe place for me. So this is one of those issues. And if you extend that, let's say you're gonna try to access help, then you go to those particular organizations that help refugees, and you feel like they don't even mention the word LGBTQI once in a whole website. And they call themselves diverse, and they're embracing diversity, and they even mention all the ethnicities that they are kind of representing. I don't know and I say, if you are naming even those minorities that you represent, why you don't even acknowledge that within those minorities that you're mentioning, LGBTQI will be always present, because we are in every single culture of the whole world. There is not a single community in the world in which we are not part of. So that sense of feeling that they are not willing to name us because maybe they are afraid of what, I don't know, because we are in New Zealand.
Yeah. It sounds a bit like a call to action, Eliana.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's happening. I mean, if I'm gonna go get food and I go to an organization, and that organization is somehow framed in a religious sense, I feel like, oh my God, that's already not a safe space for me. Okay, and this is one of the things that I can say. And yeah.
So leading on from that and further in our discussion, we'll talk about how service providers and how people who are working in this space can make some practical steps, and we're going to come across that. But first, I just we're going to touch on this not post COVID-19 anymore, the impacts of COVID-19 for community and for your communities. And so I know, both of you have been working in this space over the last few days, obviously, and would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the issues, like we quite early on level 4, we got an email from a wonderful ally in another part of the country where a work and income manager had told them about the increase to the food grant and had explicitly sent it out to refugee services and said, and I'd said, can you ask, does this apply to convention refugees and asylum seekers? And this manager came back and said, yes, it does. Well, it didn't. So even when someone within work and income thinks we're included, thinks that all of the communities are included, but as any person working in the sector knows, special needs grants are restricted solely to permanent residents, and food grants are a special needs grant.
Yeah.
And so the support services that were put out there, it was assumed they met community needs, and they didn't. And that's one of the examples where it's not just specific to rainbow communities, but to all asylum seekers and convention refugees. Then there's the assumption that people, like they might say, we've put food, we're making more food parcels available or masks available through community organisations. Well, community organisations, there's an assumption that our members of Rainbowpath could go to an ethnic or cultural community or to a religious community. Like no one says, I didn't see anything. Maybe there were food parcels available through a Rainbow Youth or something, but we never heard of anything. We kept asking. We did find a wonderful non-binary activist who made some masks for some of our members. But we've been struggling to find places, and when people have been getting food parcels, they've been told not to come back again, that they've had their food parcel. And then lots of our other issues are similar to other people here. Many members are in casual work, short shifts, irregular shifts. No one offered them a wage subsidy, but they were jobs where they were expected to come to work. And, in level 4, we're travelling across town in buses with no masks. Didn't know if they could be eligible for sick leave if they were unwell, because no one had ever told them they were eligible. But in some cases, if they'd worked 10 hours or more a week and been there 6 months, they would have been. Those were some of the and also London's, these are similar for other people. People really worried about people at home, because back in their countries of origin, family members have got COVID-19, and people who they've been trying to bring, New Zealand through the long-winded processes, and then everything shut down. So those are similar experiences to others, but when that one person was the one person who has known and understood you and stood by you for so many years, and who might finally have got here. And, it's just the uncertainty for all asylum seekers and convention refugees at this time, with added uncertainties if anyone's trying to get gender affirming care, because all of those elective surgeries have stopped. So people aren't being able to get access to healthcare. So multiple uncertainties and lack of control over one's life.
I think it's the prioritization of health services. So we are seen as a non-priority, and so that's what's happening right now to many of our members. They were ongoing on processes for specific treatments, and they've just been kicked out of the system because they are not considering this a priority. And many of our members are experiencing right now extreme levels of depression and isolation that is just exacerbated with forced isolation. I mean, when they're asking us to isolate, we say, like, we can't isolate more. You know, for us, level 3, level 2, level 1, that doesn't make any difference because we are isolated already. So, but when the institution is, when there is kind of like this requirement to be isolated, that just increases our, you know, few chances that we have to interact with others to 0. And that makes our life even more challenging because for us, once a week chance that we have to, you know, to be in a community, and then we cannot do that. So for us, it's a big difference. It changes our lives a lot. So this is something I wanted to mention as well.
Eliana, you did a poll on we've got a Facebook, Facebook group, and we asked some people what were the main issues. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, so we asked our members if they can list what are the problems or specifically issues that are related to COVID-19. Most of our members, they mentioned that mental health challenges and isolation was one of the top issues that we're experiencing right now during COVID-19. Now, the second most, it was ongoing immigration issues and uncertainty, because no one knows what's going to happen with their cases. Some of them are still waiting for their cases to pass through the system. And many others are also struggling to bring their partners to New Zealand. So, and they also feel total uncertain what's going to happen because New Zealand pretty much has closed their borders. Food insecurity, it's also another issue. And this is compassed together with lack of access for healthcare services, gender affirming healthcare services. And then there's a stress that some members are experiencing because they are part of the essential care, like essential workers, so they're working more, or they are studying in inadequate facilities, which I think a lot of New Zealanders are experiencing also this, and also access to work and livelihood. So some of our members are experiencing that. So that's in one of the last ones that were mentioned by 2 members of our community is stigmatization. People are blaming COVID-19 on LGBTQI people. And so this is one of the things that we find very stupid, but this is happening. And also gender-based violence and homelessness.
Right.
Are issues that we're experiencing. So those are some of those issues that are important for us to know, are experiencing our community. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a little bit of a sort of situation, sort of where to from here. How can service providers better support LGBTQIA+ communities?
Yeah, so I mentioned that before, Sarah.
Yeah.
It is very, very important that you feel safe. And I'm saying this a little bit emotional because I feel that many people don't understand how important it is to see a way, like you can see that this place that you are going to ask help is actually a place that is supporting you. And it's not about having a member that is gay or a member that is trans. It's you being proud of supporting LGBTI issues. And this is really complex because, and especially during these challenging times, and when you are hungry, you're starving, and you are questioning yourself, I'm starving, but this community that is offering food parcels, they are really mean to me. And you don't understand how horrible it is for you to balance this out, like their hate for me or my starvation. These 2 things could be actually equally important. Is that I have dignity. I'm not gonna go there and to be treated badly, and to be misgendered, to be being called even faggot. I know some of our members have been called that way when they go and ask for help and food. So those things are very important, and this is institutional. This is not just about you, Sarah, representing RAS and being a proud ally of LGBTI issues, but stating it widely on RAS, and I don't know, putting posters, letting people know that you are supporting them, because you never know when you're talking to one of us. You might be talking to one of us and you never know. And we absorb, we are sponges. We are constantly trying to either invisibilize ourselves because it's a survival mechanism we have. But we are so for these things. Even if you don't know, we know if you are or not LGBTIQ supported because we absorb all the comments you make. And these things are very important for us to feel safe if I go to the Red Cross and if I enter the website of the Red Cross and I say, are they supporting people or they don't discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity? Okay, cool. They are saying it. So I think it's a policy. It's part of their policies. I'm sure that the workers over there are very aware of this being a thing that has to be known and mentioned, and it's part of their organizational culture. So I feel safe, you know? I feel like I don't have to challenge the system. I don't have to beg for food. I don't have to beg for help. I don't need to explain them who am I, you know? I don't need to make anyone uncomfortable, because this is another issue. Why we have to feel that our presence makes people uncomfortable? That shouldn't be even a situation. We shouldn't be in that situation. We are just we, you know. Why I need to, like, you know, remove my identity so I don't feel make someone uncomfortable? Okay.
Kia ora. Thanks for sharing that, Eliana. I know that's not easy. Yeah.
I'm saying it because I felt it in person, so that's why. In friends of mine, yeah.
Yeah. Jack, do you want to add to some like really practical things that you see and that you guys have seen that people can start doing, like as of Monday, level 2? But you know, we've talked about some really practical things. They're not difficult.
Yeah, well, you know, if it's your website or your social media platform, you know, just Google and find, you know, Orum's got some really good stuff. Put some examples of rainbow refugees and asylum seekers around whatever topics you normally put on your website. It's just part of the normal diversity of experiences you show there. So normalize that we are part, that our communities, and particularly those people who are refugees and asylum seekers from rainbow communities, are part of your worldview and your community as well. We're working on, we're creating a poster that's going to basically advertise Rainbowpath. So I think you've got our email address, but we've kept it small because we've had to make it safe for people. So we've got our really small group, and we you know, we chat in a Facebook Messenger group multiple times every day, and we share things we don't want to lose in a secret Facebook page. And then some people here who aren't rainbow are part of a bigger group that's the Rainbowpath Facebook page. But we're going to create a website before the end of the year, and we're also going to create this poster with, we haven't come up with the phrase yet, but it'll be something about, you know, terms to describe rainbow identities in lots of different languages that refugees and asylum seekers speak in Aotearoa. So we could do with some help from people who can maybe check some of the language we do there. We'll also use our rainbow networks around the world, because we need to make sure that the language is a positives term, that you're not just giving us the word that your uncle back home uses as a derogatory term against the lesbian that lives in the local village. We need to find the positive terms. So we're going to create that poster. But, you know, policies, lots of it is about the stuff that I'm sure you've already got around non-discrimination policies within most organisations, around disability, around ethnicity. Add our communities into those policies. If an issue comes up, it's not the person who brought the problem to you, you know, the person who says, please support me, I want to do this and I'm being excluded. It's not their responsibility to train your staff, to figure out how to resolve the issues. Too often when people have brought issues up, people have said, oh, you must have misunderstood. It's just a personal, you know, misunderstanding. You know, it needs to be a systemic response. Like, okay, here's the complaints mechanism. Yes, we'll try and resolve it at a low level, and then we'll make it really clear that when these things come up, this is what you do. Have a gender neutral bathroom in your facilities, which works for lots of people. If, you know, if someone is a support worker for someone who's a different gender from them, it's quite good to have a gender neutral one if they have to go in together. So, and then those are sort of the things to reduce the harm, but also celebrate us, celebrate people like Eliana, celebrate our stories, the wonderful diversity of sexual orientation, gender identity, across the whole of, you know, the places where refugees and asylum seekers come to Aotearoa. We can share some wonderful resources, you know, in different languages that people have created, including, you know, I can think of, there's really positive religious texts from many parts of the world as well. You know, start the conversations. I think we've got some rainbow community organisations here. I know that Rainbowpath, we're trying to build up knowledge about refugee and asylum issues amongst our rainbow communities. So we've done some workshops with them, and working with them, you know, we could support your organisations to build up your knowledge around rainbow issues. And some of it, it's not all lecturing like this. It can be really practical modules, whether it's with reception staff around practical stuff around the admin forms people fill out, whether it's people who answer the phone. Please don't say sir or ma'am, and judge whether someone's a sir or a man by their voice, because you'll get it, you know, you'll get it wrong about 50% of the time with me if you do that, and I'll never ring you back. But you know, there's lots of really practical stuff, and some of us have done this work in other spaces before, and we really want to do it in this space because our community, Rainbowpath members, for example, need trauma-informed counselling support from RAS. Maybe some of the people providing that work from RAS could, you know, benefit from some supervision or mentoring from some rainbow counsellors who can talk about some stuff around gender dysphoria for those trans people who experience that. Not everyone does, but, you know, some sharing of the load and sharing of the expertise, because, you know, our community is just really falling through the gaps, and it's been heightened by COVID-19 because all of the language is about let's all pull together. And when you all pull together and there's so many things, look, there's this and this, and then you keep on having to say to people, but that doesn't include us. Look at the wording. You have to be a permanent resident. So it's that just heightens when people say that there are services there, but they don't feel safe, or they explicitly exclude. Like I know on other calls people have talked about StudyLink. You know, our members have been trying to get onto those free fees courses. Well, one without permanent residence obviously can't get a student allowance, but then we're told that you couldn't do a StudyLink course if you had a tertiary qualification from another country. But that tertiary qualification isn't recognised here. You have got absolutely no piece of paper you can use. You can't get a work visa that's good enough to get you a job. You really want to study? No, that you can't do that either. No one adds all the pieces together and sees that the jigsaw has these huge holes in the middle.
Absolutely, and we covered some of those in our asylum seekers webinar as well. Absolutely, yeah. I just because we've got to 9:15, which is sort of where we're at for Q&A. So anybody who's listening who has some questions, feel free to now shoot through some questions to us. While you're thinking of your questions and putting them through, I'd just like to point out that in the chat, if anybody has heard anything here today that makes them feel like they might want to get some extra support, I've just put in the chat a link to Outline. And that's a phone number there and a link to their webpage. And then also the email for Rainbowpath. And the third link I've put there is a link to the Canberra Statement. And I was just wondering, Eliana, while we're waiting for some questions and things to come through there, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, so the Canberra Statement was a document and that was a result of the first queer displacement conference that we held in Australia. It was the first time ever that in this part of the world a conference was made only speaking about LGBTQ plus asylum seekers and refugees. So the outcome of this conference, in which more than 150 persons attended, was this document. So this statement speaks on the access for safety and justice for LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers and refugees, especially in this part of the world, Australia and New Zealand. And it was a document that was made with the Queer Sisterhood group, which is a couple of lesbians that are former refugees that they live in Australia, and myself. So in this document, we explain roughly what we spoke today, obviously more detailed. And this is a good piece of work people can use to understand in general the complexities of the LGBTIQ identity within the asylum seeking and refugee system, okay? And people also can sign if they want to affirm this statement. We have more than 300, 400 different signatories, including 67 organizations. So the more people sign this document, the better for us, because we can use this document to push on changes, especially at policy level. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So that link is there in the chat if you're interested to understand more about that. So here we've got some questions.
Here, I just wanted one quick thing just to say to anyone, if you reach out to us at rainbowpath@protonmail.com, it's an encrypted email address. It's really, really safe. We will not disclose, there's only a couple of us in the group who have access to that. We will not disclose anything to anyone else. It's an individual conversation with people. And then before people join and meet others in the group, Eliana or I meet with the person first in person or by Zoom or something. And, people can be questioning or just thinking about their gender identity, or even starting to question or think about whether or not they may seek asylum. We're not lawyers. We don't give legal advice. We just direct them. These are some good lawyers you might want to talk to, but we're just there to listen, provide total confidentiality. No one else will know that you come to us. No one else, we won't disclose that, that you said you were trans or that you said that you were an asylum seeker. You don't have to tell us what country you are from. We know that sometimes that's really scary. It's just a very safe place. You can just talk to us by email if you want as well. And just wanted to emphasize that.
Great. Thanks, Jack. That's great. It's great to have some more detail on that. Okay, so there's a question here from Mackenzie. Is there a universally recognized symbol organizations like RAS or any other organization may be able to put on their website to show non-English speakers that we are welcoming and inclusive? Are we just thinking the rainbow, or is that universal enough, and is that sort of sufficient enough?
So, I mean, personally, I believe the rainbow to be universal enough. I mean, obviously, that rainbow flag might not represent all the different small identities that are often represented, but it is close enough for you to feel that the person that you are dealing with or the organization that you're dealing with it's embracing this aspect of your identity. So that would be one of the things. Obviously, that's not enough. It's not like just to put a flag and that's it, because you can have staff members that have very negative views about LGBTQI issues, and then you happen to encounter terrible experiences with this person, and then you see behind the person that is a rainbow flag and you say, this does not make sense. But this rainbow flag can save lives sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Great. There's another question here saying, thank you to Eliana and Jack for sharing this fantastic kōrero with us. How can people donate to Rainbowpath, financially or otherwise?
I will leave that to Jack. Jack. We can't hear you.
Sorry, it was because I was typing and I type like Kermit the Frog very noisily, so I had to mute. just email us and we can sort that out. At the moment, we don't have our own bank account, and we do everything financial through Rainbow Youth, which is really good because Francis there used to work in a bank, and so they've got very good processes, and they do that for us without charging anything, so anything we get comes to us. So we can sort something out. But yes, you know, so much of the resources that people get, it's like Asylum Seeker Support Trust putting those Facebook posts out, you know, because there's a student who needs a laptop. You rely on your wider networks, and our networks aren't wired enough yet, but we hope once we've got the website up there, we'll be able to reach out to more people. But often actually, you know, the support we're looking for is someone who's who can go and advocate for someone to be able to, you know, start a course, or when the documents don't quite add up. We're doing lots of that stuff, but, you know, if we had more contacts within different places, it would be really useful. So obviously we rely on Freya and that at Asylum Seeker Support Trust too. But yeah, if people have got resources, yeah, that would be great. Just reach out to us.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Especially organizations. If those organizations are visibly comfortable with the LGBTQI issues, for instance, the Asylum Seeking Trust is one of them, then we can obviously have this partnership. And for instance, right now we're dealing with the food insecurity for some members, then we can, these connections are quite important. Because as I mentioned to you, right now during lockdown, so it's not safe for someone to deliver food to someone that is LGBTIQ, because it might be, you know, putting that person under a situation that is not comfortable, especially if that person happens to know the person delivering food parcels, or they might find out who they are, or they might find out they are trans, or all these things that are unnecessary. So this is one of those things that we're trying to find ways around.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think we're sort of getting to the wrap up. Is there any sort of final words either of you have?
Well, as I say that, I just want to remind is that we're happy to provide some understanding of our particular issues, rainbow issues. It's not enough 1 hour to explain particularities of the rainbow identities and our challenges, because there are many. We just summarize few because of the time, but we are happy to provide this knowledge. We're happy to educate. There are organizations in New Zealand that do this training more professionally, which is rainbow competence, if this is really relevant, and many organizations need it, especially organizations that are dealing with people that are running away from their countries because of their rainbow identity. So rainbow identity is very important. Often the knowledge that people have about rainbow issues is lacking, and there are stereotypings, usually using heteronormative frameworks. There is only one way of being gay, there is only one way of being lesbian. Often the bisexual identity is not even understood, or intersex issues are not totally understood, transgender issues, how the body should be presented, non-binary identities, and the list can go on. And these things are not understood by the wider community. And these often can be problematic because we fall on the gaps if we're not understood, you know. So, yeah, that's pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful that that you can support people in understanding that better as well, or that we're able to find pathways through you guys, for sure. Jack, anything else you'd like to finish off with?
Just say thanks to Raz. Like, this is about a partnership, you know, you asking us, you know, to be part of this, and people from Raz are coming to provide a bit of a workshop with our members. I just saw Samantha pop up there, and, you know, we had a really good chance to go and talk. Actually, you were our first presentation to the Metro Auckland DHBs, and really practical things we worked on them, because some of our members were being made to pay, you know, they had to pay the high price for scripts at pharmacies, because people at a pharmacy would ask, are you a permanent resident? That
Right.
was their shorthand for do you pay the high cost, or do you get it at a cheaper rate? And Sam put us in touch with some people who helped sort out that. But it's a lot of individual battles, and particularly around identity documents. It's a lot of those. So if we, you know, let's keep working together. And, you know, I'm very aware that while I've worked in rainbow communities all my life in different ways, you know, it's relatively new for me to be working in this space, and lot to learn about refugee and asylum issues from all of you, as well as from all of the Rainbow Path members. So let's keep working together.
Kia ora. Awesome. So I'm going to close today, and thank you so much. It's just super wonderful being able to sit here and chat with both you, Eliana and Jack. You're really inspiring to me. You teach me every time I have a conversation with you. You inspire me to learn more, and I hope that that's been the case for everybody who's been listening tonight.
Can I just thank our other members, because not
Yes.
everyone, lots of people, it's not safe for them to show their face. So lots of the material was written by other members of the group, and like Eliana did the poll. So thank you to all of them, some of who are listening now, because it's, you know, I hope soon I'm not even here and it's just all of the Rainbow Path members who are refugees and asylum seekers who are running these.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you to all the Rainbow Path members, and for all of you out there. So we actually have one more in our series of webinars, and that will be taking place on Wednesday, August the 26th at 12 p.m. And that's on resettlement issues with Rachel O'Connor and Tayaba Khan. So I'd just like to finish off with the phrase, He waka e ke noa. We are all in this together. Ka kite ano.